So Prey's been out for a few days and the reviews are slowly trickling in, with the notion being that the whole thing's either amazing and one of the best games to come along this year, or something that's underwhelming and ultimately forgettable. And one of the key things lacking in most of the reviews I've either read or watched is people mentioning the fact that Prey is a game that excels in multiple playthroughs. In fact, it's a game that I dare say has to be played a second, if not a third time, to really appreciate everything it has on offer. Even those reviewers who smash a review out and slap an 8 or 9 out of 10 on it and call it a day aren't really doing the whole thing justice, and whereas certain games in recent memory, cough cough, No Man's Sky, have epitomised the phrase wide as an ocean, deep as a puddle, Prey's a game that's really wide as an ocean and deep as one as well. Hindsight, as they say, is 20/20, and I'd like to talk a little bit about why in hindsight I think Prey may be one of the best games we've had in recent years. So without trying to sound like a pretentious dickbag or a hypocrite, let's talk about why that is. Now this is more of a rant than a review, though you could consider it a follow-up review if you're so inclined, and obviously it should go without saying, but there's going to be a fair few spoilers in this video, so it's probably best if you've played and finished the game before watching this. And Sonny Jim, don't say I didn't warn you. Developed by Arcane Studios, known for primarily their work on the Dishonored games, and whereas Dishonored was their way of paying homage to the Thief games, Prey is really their love letter to the Bioshock and more importantly the System Shock games. One of the interfaces in-game used for playing back video logs is referred to as a Looking Glass. Looking Glass Studios of course being the developers of System Shock 1 and 2, and the remnants of which went on to create Irrational Games and develop Bioshock. Now let's just get this out of the way first up. The game has absolutely nothing to do with Prey 2 or even the original Prey game. I don't know why people are exactly up in arms about this. I mean, I understand they wanted to play the original Prey 2 we all saw in all those trailers. I mean, I did too. But the name of something doesn't detract from your experience playing it. I mean, Doom could have been called Super Demon Killer 2016 and it still would have been awesome. So what Prey has done, aside from taking the name of an unrelated game series, is take a lot of those elements we had in System Shock 1 and 2 and kind of bring them into 2017, and it does this exceedingly well. But the important thing is I think it's a game that's driven more by the environment itself than it is by the story. Not that the story isn't any good, it's just it ultimately plays second fiddle to how captivating the game world actually is. The basic gist of the whole thing is that you're playing as either a male or a female character named Morgan Yu, working alongside your brother Alex, researching, among other things, neuromod technology. In-game, the neuromods are what serves as upgrades for Morgan, with the subplot being that messing around with these things can impair the memories of the person using them. Similar to how Adam in Bioshock would mess with someone's humanity, essentially turning them into violent drug addicts, willing to murder little girls for their fix. What this boils down to in Prey is that Morgan isn't quite sure where his allegiances lie with Alex, and when the place becomes under attack by the Typhon, it puts this into question even more. The campaign then becomes this journey to uncover the truth, with various side characters along the way offering up alternate viewpoints and filling in a few of the blanks as to how Morgan ended up where he or she is. But honestly, the story is a means to an end here, and what I really think the whole thing is about is putting the player in these large, detailed game worlds and letting them forge their own path, and the way this has been handled in-game totally blows any other similar titles out of the goddamn water, and it's by far the game's biggest strength. Being, I guess, an RPG at heart, the gameplay is going to revolve around either exploration, combat, or stealth, and regardless of how you're approaching this, the game world is a relentless and unforgiving one. I think we've become a bit spoilt in shooting games in recent years in the way that we just expect to be able to generally shoot at something a few times to kill it and walk around areas mostly unscathed. Even the environment in this game has the ability to harm you. I mean, moving too fast in zero gravity and colliding into something can seriously injure you. There's areas soaked in harmful radiation, there's electrical circuits that are shorting out, and there's pipes that spew out acid or fire. We haven't really had that many shooting games lately where your entire surroundings can become a hazard. As much as I love the recent Doom reboot, and believe me, I really love it, defeating the enemies in that game and surviving is largely just about the player's mobility. Bottomless pits and pools of lava can simply be avoided as long as you're not blind, and most of the enemies fire projectiles that can easily be dodged with a combination of utilising the environment to your advantage and never staying in one spot for too long. You've always got plenty of ammunition, and to top it all off, you're able to use the game's glory kill system to replenish a bit of health if need be. Now, whilst Prey is still a shooting game to a degree, the enemies you come up against are going to outright punish you if you try to take a combat approach the entire time, at least early on. Enemies in this game, as I mentioned before, are the Typhon, which is that super pissed off race of aliens that come in various forms and really make it their mission to ruin the day of every human they come into contact with. You've got the basic mimics, which can take on the appearance of seemingly innocent items and objects, through to the telepaths and technopaths who can control both humans and machines respectively. Phantoms form the sort of grunts of the Typhons, and even these guys are broken down into multiple categories, making each encounter more unique. Some Phantoms have the ability to short out your suit with electrical attacks, and others can teleport around and even duplicate themselves to make the combat trickier. And even after playing for like 25 hours, I keep finding myself forgetting that mimics were a thing. I mean, I'd be moving through a seemingly empty area, picking up supplies and reading emails and all that kind of stuff, then a chair would suddenly snap to life and turn into a mimic, providing a cheap jump scare and taking off a chunk of my health. I had an upgrade for my Psychoscope, which is the item you use for scanning enemy weaknesses, that allowed me to see hidden mimics, and I'd utilize this maybe 90% of the time, but that's all it takes in this game, is that 10% when you let your wit slip, at which point you'll regret it pretty soon after. I think the gunplay in Prey is deliberately underwhelming though. It seems Arcane Studios wanted to ensure that the enemies were always at least some sense of a threat to the player. A fully upgraded shotgun might work pretty well at close range against a couple of enemy types, but at any sort of longer distance it becomes extremely ineffective. The low damage output of a weapon like the pistol makes it more useful for stealth attacks against weaker enemies than anything else. The glue gun's a pretty handy weapon, especially against the mimics, but it loses its effectiveness against bigger Typhon, and even against some of the Phantoms it can feel really underpowered. Its usage is about 50-50 combat to modifying elements of the game, so its use isn't limited just to engaging with enemies. Even after 2 playthroughs, I've still never found myself using the wrench all that much. Considering to make it all that effective, you need to spend neuromods on it, and that's a pretty hefty chunk of neuromods that could be spent on more well-rounded abilities. Overall, the feeling I've gotten is that the game wants to push you towards using the alien abilities, perhaps in a way because the game's trying to reinforce that story element of the player losing their grip with humanity. I mean, hitting someone with a wrench for stealth damage is fine, but using an AoE attack that can hit multiple enemies from a long distance I found to be a lot more effective, especially on higher difficulties. But a lot like the very games that Prey takes influence from, there's not really a right or wrong way to play this game, and I think that journey of trying to find what works best for you is another part of the game that makes it so unique. Anyone could argue that a wrench and a stealth build is as effective as one aimed towards, the shotgun and Q-beam. In a lot of ways, Prey even beats System Shock 2 at its own game. I mean, the sheer amount of stuff you can do is just staggering, and regardless of how long you spend playing, you're still going to be learning little tricks and things that you're capable of pulling off. Even after taking like 15 hours to play through the game for the first time, it wasn't until about 4 or 5 hours into my second playthrough that I learned that the Huntress Boltcaster, which I'd only used to activate buttons from a distance, could also be used to interact with computer terminals. Let's talk about the fact that the whereabouts of every single crew member aboard Talos I is accounted for. Every single crew member, and you can literally track down their exact position and find them, whether they're dead or alive. Choices you make throughout the campaign will affect whether or not certain characters live or die, and if you don't have the necessary skills during some of these side missions, you quite literally can't complete them. I'm reminded back to a moment in System Shock 2 where you needed to hack a vending machine to progress onward through the story, and if you didn't have a point to spend in hacking and hadn't already upgraded it, well, the game was literally unbeatable at that point. And whether or not you've got the tools for the job falls on the player. The amount of containers, cupboards, drawers, crates, etc. that contain items in this game is kind of amazing. And ironically, it's easy to overlook some of them because there really is that many of them. You lose track of what you've searched already, and this is the kind of thing that I think can objectively make or break your experience and success with a playthrough. Choosing what to spend your neuromods on can also make you a lot more effective during combat, but hinder you in other ways as well. I mean, during my second playthrough, I spent a bit more time upgrading my alien abilities to the point where I had so many of them in my system that the turrets around the Talos station identified me as a Typhon and shot me on sight, forcing me to either evade turrets from that point on or make the decision of having to disable them, which in turn would mean they wouldn't fire back at actual Typhon, negating their usefulness. For my first playthrough on hard mode, I was scrimping by with only ever 2 or 3 medkits at a time, a similar amount of Psi-Hypos and barely any ammo, and yet on my second playthrough on Nightmare, I ended up with around 40 medkits and the same amount of Psi-Hypos. Plenty of ammunition, and somehow I was inundated with neuromods to the point where I started spending them on skills just for the sake of spending them. And again, sounding like a broken record, it all harks back to what I've been saying, how you really have to play through this game multiple times, and I think it's essential to the entire experience. People who've just done the whole wham bam thank you ma'am thing, whether it be scoring it highly or lowly, aren't really approaching it correctly, and look, I think I'm a little bit guilty of this myself when I covered the game for my channel. Having said all of this though, I don't want to seem like I'm acting as if the game is some kind of flawless masterpiece, and the whole truth of the matter is that it's truly not a game for everyone. Is it a perfect game? No, but it sure is one of the most subjective ones we've seen in a long time. Ironically, I pretty much hated the System Shock games when I first played them as well, and it wasn't until I played System Shock 2 for the second time that it became etched into becoming one of my favourite games of all time. Prey does still have a few problems, I think, niggling as they are, and I think a few of my complaints still stand. My original complaint or critique, I guess, about the recycling and fabrication system is still valid. I mean, look, there's not really any skill or challenge in putting items in a recycling machine, then just doing a 180 and using those components to create items from a fabrication machine, seeing as the recycling and fabrication machines are often right next to each other. Honestly, look, I just feel like a simple shop interface would make this process a lot more streamlined. Maybe if you could just convert junk items into credits or something, then replace the fabrication machine with, as I said, some kind of shop interface, where you could just then purchase items. Breaking items down into different types of materials I just feel is overly complex for no good reason, other than just to appear overly complex. Stealth, I still can't really see all that much of a point to, at least not as a primary gameplay decision. I mean, if you're just trying to sneak past a couple of Typhon to get to an objective and your supplies are a bit scarce, then that's fine. But avoiding every single enemy in the game means you're going to miss out on a whole heap of useful items. Phantoms, for instance, seem to drop plenty of weapon upgrade kits and Psi Hypos as an example. It's for similar reasons I didn't spend any points on the Mimic ability. I mean, I'd rather spend my Psi on Kinetic Blast and do 100 plus points of damage to an enemy than spend it on turning into a chair or a roll of toilet paper. Let's talk about the ending too. Now, this has also divided people who've played it a fair bit, and I'll be honest, I think the whole "it was a dream the whole time" thing is a bit of a lame cop-out. But as I've been saying, I think the real enjoyment and longevity in Prey comes more from messing around with the mechanics of the game world than the story itself, so I'm willing to largely overlook how stupid this story is. As a spiritual sequel or homage, if you will, to System Shock 2, I'd say Prey ticks all the boxes. It has rough edges, it feels unbalanced at times, and it can often feel like the game world doesn't give a shit if you live or die. But it has one of the most rich, detailed, creative, and palpable game worlds I think I've ever seen in a video game, or at least one in recent memory. And if you can learn to love what you hate about this game, then it's definitely worth checking out.